Is it true that nations only exist through force, or that maybe they're just a arbitrary collection of agreements? Oh, we agree we're going to be this nation, and these are arbitrary borders that we've agreed on. Let's see what the popes say. Hello, welcome back to Intermarifica, New Mexico, the channel where we look at things of wonder from the perspectives of faith and reason, philosophy and theology. I'm your host, Daniel Kelly, and we've been gone for quite a bit here, so I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy to be back. I had written this script before all the craziness that's going on in the world came on the proper use of force, because I've been reading the document Pacem In Terris by Pope John the 23rd, and it's really, really cool. And I had wanted to share the wonder of the Church's teaching on, peace on earth, Pacem In Terris. And I had seen a conservative commentator, this is before all this craziness started happening, that nations don't have a right to exist, right? They're just they exist through force, and force is what makes nations exist. And I was struck by this because it seems to me very similar to what some quote-unquote liberal people might say, where a nation is just, borders are just arbitrary things, nations are just arbitrary things, that's what we agree to, but there's no real thing there, it's just agreements, it's just arbitrary. And I think that this is kind of a horseshoe effect, where in the middle people don't think that, but the two extremes kind of agree. Yeah, nations are just this thing that arbitrarily exists, either through force or agreement or whatever. It's not really real. But how does that kind of stack up with the common Christian understanding? Well, we see if we look at Scripture, where it seems, I love this, that each nation has like a seat on the council of gods, right? There's an angel, as would be developed by later thought, attached to each angel, to each nation, and I think that's really cool. So that seems like it's kind of not arbitrary. It could seem like, well, maybe it's like a person. Yeah, we come about through an arbitrary, quote-unquote, act of two people's wills or parents' wills, but then we're not arbitrary. It brings about this thing that is us, that's approved by God, that's made by God. And so it could be like that. And we even see in the Christian tradition, right, when we're looking at angels, that three of the choirs of angels, and this is small t tradition, and I'll do a whole episode on angels later, so you don't have to accept it, but it is a very, very ancient tradition, and I see no reason for rejecting what many Christians meditating on the Scriptures came up with. But there's these three choirs of angels. There's the guardian angels, there's the archangels that have messages, and then there's the principalities that are the guardian angels for each country. And that's not just a Christian thing. All kinds of mythologies and belief systems have, there's certain spirits associated with different countries. So it's a very natural human thought. And I think we would have to have a lot of evidence to overcome that and get rid of that. And so it seems like God has some special structure for nations. And if we look at going forward, if we look at Pacem In Terris by John the 23rd, it actually reinforces this belief. So we don't have to just look on our interpretation of Scripture or the small t tradition of angelology, right, to see, is there something real behind nations, or are they just arbitrary? Well, let's look at what the Pope says in Pacem In Terris. In section 4, he seems to be addressing this very conception that, we only exist through force. Nations only exist through force. Yet there is a disunity among individuals and among nations, which is in striking contrast to this perfect order in the universe. Right? There's this great order in the universe, but not among nations and people. One would think that the relationships that bind men together could only be governed by force. So you would think that. But the world's creator has stamped man's inmost being with an order revealed to man by his conscience, and his conscience insists on his preserving it. Men show the work of the law written in their hearts. Their conscience bears witness to them. And how could it be otherwise? All created being reflects the infinite wisdom of God. It reflects it all the more clearly the higher it stands on the scale of perfection, right? Us and nations show forth the wisdom of God in an even higher way. He's mostly talking about individuals, but if you see all through his encyclical, he's going to compare nations. Okay, we know the norms of justice for individuals. Well, how we can say that's the same way nations work. But the mischief is often caused by erroneous opinions. Many people think that the laws which govern man's relations with the state are the same as those which regulate the blind elemental forces of the universe. But it is not so. The laws which govern men are quite different. The Father of the universe has inscribed them in man's nature, and that is where we must look for them, there and nowhere else. These laws clearly indicate how man must behave towards his fellows in society, how the mutual relationships between the members of a state and its officials are to be conducted. They show, too, what principles must govern the relations between states. And finally, what should be the relations between individuals or states on the one hand and the worldwide community of nations on the other, right? So we've got individuals, we've got nations, and there's an order to how they're supposed to relate to each other. And later on, he'll get explicit on, okay, nations are kind of analogous to individuals. With respect to the states themselves, our predecessors have constantly taught, and we wish to lend the weight of our own authority to their teaching, that nations are the subjects of reciprocal rights and duties. Right? There are rights and duties towards states. They have rights and they have duties. Their relationships, therefore, must likewise be harmonized in accordance with the dictates of truth, justice, willing cooperation, and freedom. The same law of nature that governs the life and conduct of individuals must also regulate the relations of political communities with one another. So that same law of nature that governs individuals also governs nations. That's pretty crazy to think about. So when you think about, well, how does it affect for an individual? So does an individual just exist by force? Is individuals' rights just arbitrary, like people say about the nation's borders? You start thinking about it. Okay, how do we understand how states work? We look at what individuals are like. And he talks about some of these rights in section 86. The first point to be settled is that mutual ties between states must be governed by truth. Truth calls for the elimination of every trace of racial discrimination and the consequent recognition of the inviolable principle that all states are by nature equal in dignity. So they have a certain dignity by their very nature, states do, and it's all equal, just like persons. Each of them accordingly has the right to exist. It doesn't just exist by force. It's not just arbitrary. We decided this exists. States have a right to exist. So each of them accordingly has the right to exist, to develop, and to possess the necessary means and accept a primary responsibility for its own development. Each is also legitimately entitled to its good name and to the respect which is its due, just like persons. All these are rights persons have. And he's saying, look, you look at persons, this is their rights. Look at states, they're analogous. And further on, section 89. The fact that no one can be by nature superior to his fellows, since all men are equally noble in natural dignity, and consequently there are no differences at all between political communities from the point of view of natural dignity. Each state is like a body, the members of which are human beings. So again, this analogy is going forward. A state is like a human body. And as we know from experience, nations can be highly sensitive in matters in any way touching their dignity and honor, and with good reason. Yeah, that just kind of makes sense. I'm just going to read one more part just to hammer it home how states are like persons. So states have the right to existence, to self-development, and to the means necessary to achieve this. They have the right to play the leading part in the process of their own development, and the right to their good name and due honor. Consequently, states are likewise in duty bound to safeguard all such rights effectively, right? And to avoid any action that could violate them. Just as individual men may not pursue their own private interests in a way that is unfair and detrimental to others, so too it would be criminal in a state to aim at improving itself by the use of methods which involve other nations in injury and unjust oppression, right? Just the same way I can't just take what I want and seek my development in a way that's detrimental to other people living in society with me. States can't do that either. There is a saying of St. Augustine which has particular relevance in this context: take away justice, and what are kingdoms but mighty bands of robbers, right? So, and there's more. He uses this analogy a lot. But why is this important? Well, think about it. Okay, we have to start, when people say silly things about countries, like they only exist by force, apply it to an individual and see if it makes sense. Do individuals only exist by force? No, that's nonsense. Or if people say, well, borders are just arbitrary things, or nations are just arbitrary things, think about it. Is that true about human individuals? No, not at all. So all these we can see are erroneous. We compare states, an easy, and it won't work for everything, because nations aren't redeemed by Christ or anything, and individuals are. But we can look at it analogously to an individual person. And what I've noticed is people who think of these crazy things about states usually fall into the same errors about persons, right? I've seen that people think, oh, states, they only exist by force, all this. Well, they're the kinds of, very often have the same kinds of ideas that, persons, this very big emphasis on force, right? Objecting to things like that you can only use reasonable force in defense of your home. I've heard a lot of people say, hey, if somebody's trespassing, whatever, I can do whatever I want to stop that trespass. I can do whatever I want to stop that person, unalive them, whatever. I can use that force. And that, of course, doesn't make sense. That's not right or just. If a confused old lady wanders onto my property and I do something bad, then that I should be liable for that, because a reasonable person wouldn't have seen any kind of threat from her. And on the other side, same thing. Same people who think nations are just kind of arbitrary, borders are kind of arbitrary. They think the same thing very often about personhood. And that's why, personhood is just an arbitrary designation that sometime you get personhood. That's why I think it's really important that we be careful in our thought about nations and about individuals. Oh, and I almost forgot. We're going to be in the Eastern season. We're going to do some live streams with a bunch of questions that I've gotten that I haven't been able to answer. So please, in the comments, put your questions that you've been wanting answered, and coming up in the Easter season, we'll do a live stream where we answer all of those. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you have a very good day. God bless you.